She was standing on my doorstep in the rain, and I almost didn't recognize her. That's the part that still haunts me. My own little sister, the person whose face mirrors mine so closely that our mother used to mix us up until we were 12 years old, and I almost didn't recognize her. Because the woman standing in front of me had a split lip, a bruise running from her cheekbone all the way down to her jaw, and eyes so hollow they looked like they belonged to someone twice her age. "Rachel," I whispered. She didn't say anything. She just stood there in the November rain, arms wrapped around herself, shaking, not from the cold. I knew the difference. I grabbed her and pulled her inside. She sank onto my couch and I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and I sat across from her and I waited. I've learned over the years that sometimes people need a minute before the words come. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I spent 6 years as a competitive mixed martial arts fighter before I retired and started coaching at a gym outside of Nashville. I'm not someone who panics easily, but sitting there watching my little sister stare at the floor, I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt since the first time I ever stepped into a cage. That cold, focused fear that sharpens everything down to a single point. "How long?" I said. Not a question, a statement. She looked up. "How long has he been doing this?" Rachel is 28. She's been married to her husband Derek for 4 years. They met at a church cookout when she was 23, and she called me that same night and said, "Claire, I think I just met my person." I remember laughing. I remember being happy for her. Derek was charming and clean-cut, and he coached youth baseball on weekends, and he shook my hand with a firm grip the first time we met, and looked me straight in the eyes. I should have paid more attention to the grip. "It's not that bad," she said. "Rachel." It was just, he was stressed. He lost a client this week, and look at me. I leaned forward and took her face in my hands gently and turned it toward the lamp. The bruise was deep purple at the center, fading to green at the edges. That coloring takes days. This isn't from this week. She closed her eyes. "How long?" I said again. The silence stretched out so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, quietly, so quietly, I almost missed it over the sound of the rain. About 2 years. 2 years. My sister had been living inside something like this for 2 years, and I had not known. I had not seen it. I had visited for Thanksgiving last year and sat at Derek's dinner table and eaten his food and thanked him for hosting, and I had not seen it. The thought made me feel sick. It made me feel like I had failed her in the most fundamental way a person can fail someone they love. I didn't let any of that show on my face. I kept my voice steady. "Does he know you're here? I told him I was going to see a friend. He doesn't like me coming here. He says you're a bad influence. Because I'd tell you to leave him." She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. I got up and made her tea and brought her a bag of frozen peas for her face, and I sat back down and I let her talk. When she started, it came out slowly at first, and then all at once, like a dam giving way. 2 years of it. The hitting started small. A shove, a grab that left marks, once a slap that he cried about afterward and promised would never happen again, and then it escalated the way these things always escalate, quietly and gradually, so that each new thing felt like only a small step beyond the last thing, until she looked up one day and realized she was somewhere she never imagined she could be. He controlled the finances. Her name wasn't on the joint account even though she worked full-time as a dental hygienist. Her paychecks went to Derek and he gave her what he decided she needed. He had taken her name off the lease of their house. She didn't have a credit card in her own name. She had, I realized as she talked, been systematically stripped of every tool she might have used to leave. "Have you talked to anyone?" I asked. "A counselor, a pastor, anyone." She laughed a little, but there was nothing funny in it. "I talked to Pastor Williams about 6 months ago. He told me that marriage is sacred and that I needed to pray harder and be a more patient wife." I kept my face still. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said, "and Derek, he's told me that if I leave, he'll make sure everyone knows I'm unstable, that I've been having mental health issues. He's been building a case, telling his family, telling people from church, so that if I ever say anything, they'll already think I'm... She stopped. He's smart, Claire. He's very smart. I know, I said. I just needed someone to know. That's all. I'm not ready to do anything yet. I just needed someone to know. I nodded. I told her she could stay the night. I told her she didn't have to do anything yet. I made up the guest room and I hugged her for a long time in the hallway before she went to sleep, and I told her I loved her and I told her none of this was her fault. Then I went and sat in my kitchen alone and I thought for a very long time. I've been coaching fighters for 4 years. I understand strategy. I understand that the worst thing you can do in a bad situation is react with pure emotion, because pure emotion makes you sloppy, and sloppiness gets you hurt. So I sat there and I thought it through carefully, from every angle, the way I would think through a game plan before a fight. Rachel wasn't ready to leave yet. That was real. Pushing her before she was ready would only make her retreat further. I've seen it happen. She needed to know she had a safe place to land when she was ready. She needed to know that Derek's carefully constructed narrative about her being unstable was not going to work on everyone, but she also needed something else, I thought. Something she hadn't asked me for, but that I could see she needed. She needed to know that she wasn't alone in that house. The idea came to me in pieces over the next hour. It wasn't a perfect plan. Looking back, I can see the 100 ways it could have gone wrong. But sitting in my kitchen at 2 a.m, turning it over in my mind, it felt like the one option that addressed the problem from an angle Derek wouldn't see coming. Rachel and I have always looked remarkably alike. Same height, same build, same dark brown hair. We used to confuse teachers in high school even though we weren't in the same classes. Over the past 4 years I had kept my hair shorter than hers, but I knew it had grown out, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the kitchen window and in the bad light. Just for a moment, we were identical. I called in a favor from a friend who works in family law. I spent the following week doing research. I contacted a domestic violence advocate in Rachel's county, quietly, just to understand what resources existed. I spoke to a close friend of mine, a woman named Teresa who had left an abusive marriage 7 years ago, and she walked me through what she wished someone had done for her. Then I called Rachel. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to hear me out before you say no." She laughed nervously. "That's never a good start. I want to visit you next weekend. I want to come to your house." Silence. "Claire, I know he doesn't want you to have visitors. I know he's going to make it difficult. But I'm not asking to come over for dinner, Rachel. I have a different idea." I laid it out for her. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "You can't do that," she finally said. "I can. What if he... I'm not afraid of Derek. You should be. You don't know what he's like when... Rachel." I kept my voice calm. I have been hit by women and men who made their living learning how to hurt people, and I have never once stayed down. I need you to trust me. Another long pause. "He's been angrier lately," she said quietly. "Things have been worse. I don't know what's going to set him off." "I know. And you still want to do this. I want you to have a night where you're not there. Go to your friend Melissa's. Tell Derek whatever you need to tell him. But I want to be in that house, and I want to see for myself exactly who Derek is when he thinks he's alone with his wife." It took her another 3 days to agree. She called me on a Tuesday night and she just said, "Okay, this weekend. He usually drinks on Friday nights." I drove to Rachel's town on Friday morning. I met her at a coffee shop 2 miles from the house. She brought me a change of clothes. She walked me through everything, the layout of the rooms, which floorboards creaked, where Derek's temper usually went first, what his patterns looked like when he'd been drinking. She was methodical about it, precise, and I realized that she had been memorizing these patterns for years, the way a person memorizes the emergency exits in a building they're afraid might catch fire someday. I also had her sign a document that my lawyer friend had helped me prepare. Nothing complicated. Just something that established a timeline, in her own words, in case we ever needed it. You look terrified, I told her. I am terrified. That's okay. I'm here. She did my hair the way she wears hers, and we stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at each other, and she started crying. I've missed you, she said. I've missed you so much, and he made me feel like I couldn't. She stopped. He made me feel like I didn't deserve to have my sister. I hugged her tight. You've always had me. You always will. I drove to her house at 3 p.m. I had her key. I let myself in through the back door the way she'd described, and I stood in her kitchen and I breathed it in. The particular atmosphere of a house that holds something ugly inside it. There's a quality to those spaces, a heaviness. I felt it before in places I've been, and I felt it here. I made myself at home. I folded laundry. I made dinner. I kept the lights low and moved the way Rachel moves, quietly, carefully, always slightly aware of where the exits are. I understood something about my sister's daily life in those few hours that no conversation could have fully conveyed. Derek came home at 6:30. I heard his truck in the driveway and I positioned myself in the kitchen with my back to the door, the way Rachel had told me she usually stood when he came in. Small and unassuming and braced for whatever mood walked through the door with him. He was drunk. I could smell it from across the room. You make dinner? He said. Yes, I said. Quiet. Careful. I heard him set his keys on the counter. The refrigerator opened and closed, the sound of a beer cracking open, which meant he wasn't done yet. House is a mess. I didn't respond. I'm talking to you. I turned around then. I met his eyes and I kept my face exactly the way I needed it to be. Calm, neutral, completely still. Anyone who is trained seriously in any combat sport knows that the pre-fight moment is the most dangerous. Your opponent is reading you. Every micro-expression, every shift in your weight tells them a story. I didn't let my face tell him any story at all. He stared at me. Something moved in his eyes, confusion first. Then he leaned forward a little, squinting in the kitchen light. I said nothing. You look. He started. Derek, I said. Not Rachel's voice, mine. Clear, flat, even. My name is Claire. The moment he understood was visible on his face. A flicker of shock, then a scramble toward anger, then something underneath the anger that was less comfortable, something closer to fear. What are you doing in my house? I'm standing in my sister's kitchen, I said, having a conversation with you. Get out. I don't think I will. He took a step toward me. He was bigger than me, 6 feet, heavy set, the kind of guy who's used to that being enough. And I want to be clear about something. I did not go looking for violence that night. That was never the plan. The plan was to witness, to document, to let Derek know, in the most direct possible terms, that Rachel was no longer alone in the way he'd counted on her being. But Derek had been drinking since at least noon, judging by the smell of him. And Derek was the kind of man who had spent 4 years learning that physical intimidation worked. And Derek made a decision in that moment that was entirely his own. He grabbed my arm. What happened in the next 40 seconds happened quickly and technically and without any anger on my part. I want to be clear about that too. It wasn't about my feelings. It was about making certain, in a language Derek would understand without any ambiguity, that the dynamic he'd grown comfortable with was over. When it was done, Derek was on the kitchen floor with his arm pinned at an angle that discouraged movement, and I was kneeling beside him, and I was still entirely calm. Listen to me, I said. I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear every word. He was breathing hard. I continued. I know what you've been doing to my sister for 2 years. I know about the finances, and I know about the isolation, and I know about what you've been telling people at church so they'll think she's crazy. I know all of it. I paused. And now there's a paper trail. There are dates and descriptions and witnesses and a lawyer who has seen all of it. So whatever story you've been building, Derek, it has a counter story now. And that counter story is going to be a lot more convincing than yours. He said something I won't repeat. If you touch her again, I said, in any way, for any reason, that paper trail goes to your employer, to your church, to everyone you know, and to law enforcement. And then I come back. And the next time, I'm angry. I let go of his arm and stood up. I straightened my shirt. I picked up my purse from the counter. And I walked out of Rachel's kitchen and out her back door, and I sat in my car in the dark for a few minutes just breathing before I drove to the coffee shop where Rachel was waiting. She was in the back corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and she stood up when she saw me come in, and she searched my face. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine. What happened?" "Your husband and I had a conversation." I sat down across from her. "I need to tell you some things." I told her everything. I told her about the lawyer. I told her about the advocate. I told her about the shelter 2 towns over that had already been contacted and had a place for her and her cat whenever she was ready. I told her about the bank account I had opened in her name at a bank in Nashville, with enough money to cover 3 months of expenses while she found her footing. I told her that I had already reached out quietly to 3 people from her church who I believed would listen, including one of the deacons who had himself lost a family member to domestic violence, and that the ground was not as hostile to her as Derek had wanted her to believe. She sat across from me and she cried, and she didn't say anything for a long time. "You did all of that," she finally said. "You're my sister." "Claire." She shook her head slowly. "He's going to be so angry." "I know. That's why you're not going back tonight. You're coming home with me. And when you're ready, tomorrow, next week, next month, we'll go get your things, together. In broad daylight, with documentation." She looked at the table for a long time. I watched her face move through something that I recognized, the terrible internal arithmetic of a person weighing the life they know, however damaged it is, against the terrifying uncertainty of something different. It's a calculation that takes time. No one can do it for you. Then she looked up. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Rachel filed for divorce 11 weeks later, because of the documentation, because of the timeline we had established, and because of 3 members of her church who came forward with their own observations once they understood she was ready to speak. The process went faster than most. Derek hired a lawyer who tried, as predicted, to introduce evidence of Rachel's alleged instability. The counter-evidence was considerably more detailed and considerably more credible. The divorce was finalized in spring. Rachel got her share of the assets. She got her cat, whose name is Biscuit, and she got the china that had been her grandmother's, and she got her life back. She lives 20 minutes from me now. She has her own bank account and her own lease and her own credit card. She goes to a different church, one where the pastor recently organized a fundraiser for the local DV shelter, and she's made friends there who know her whole story and love her anyway. She started seeing a therapist 6 months ago, and she told me recently that it's the first time in years she can sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat, listening for footsteps in the hall. She still has hard days. She's told me that. The kind of damage Derek did doesn't disappear when a marriage does. It lives in the nervous system, in the automatic flinch, in the old habit of making yourself small in a room. She's working on it. She's patient with herself in a way she never used to be, and I think that's the bravest thing I've ever watched another person do. A few months ago, she baked a pie and brought it over on a Sunday afternoon, and we sat on my porch in the warm early evening, and she was telling me something funny that had happened at work, and she was laughing, really laughing. The kind that takes over her whole face, the way it did when we were kids. And I sat there watching her, and I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't even fully realized I was still holding. That's what I want you to take from this story. Not the part where I drove to her house. Not the 40 seconds in the kitchen. Those things happened, and they were necessary, and I'd do them again without question. But the real story is the 11 weeks after that. It's Rachel sitting in a lawyer's office with a folder full of documentation and her hands steady on the table. It's Rachel telling her story to the deacon at her church and being believed. It's Rachel signing her own name on a lease for the first time in 4 years and calling me afterward, crying, saying, "Claire, I have a home." That's the story. If you are living inside something like what my sister lived inside, I need you to hear me say this as clearly as I can. The version of your life that Derek, or whoever your Derek is, has constructed. The version where you are alone, where no one will believe you, where the walls are too high and the exits are all closed. That version is a lie. It was built deliberately and specifically to keep you from leaving, and it is not the truth. The truth is that there are people who will believe you. There are resources that exist specifically for you. There are shelter beds and legal advocates and bank accounts and leases and therapists and Sunday afternoons on porches that are waiting for you on the other side of the hardest decision you will ever make. You are not crazy. You are not alone. And the door is not as locked as you've been told. If you or someone you love is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. They are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also text START to 8878788 or visit thehotline.org. Everything is confidential. Everything is judgment-free. And the call, whenever you are ready to make it, will be answered.